This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Monday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. For the last several weeks, I've been dedicating one of the week's top 10s to a look at Planeswalkers of a particular color. So far, we've taken a look at white, blue, and black, and today we're continuing with red. Planeswalkers are an incredibly strong card type. This is because they generally give you a ton of value for the mana you spend on them. Generally, you pay mana for them once, and then they give you a pretty relevant effect every single turn using their loyalty abilities. And many of them also have powerful ultimate abilities that put the game completely out of reach. To be eligible for this list, a card had to be a mono-red Planeswalker. So far, there have been 34 of those, and in this video, we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest or Grand Prix is worth 1 point. At number 10, it is Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. This double-faced card starts out as a creature version of Chandra, but it can transform into the Planeswalker Chandra Roaring Flame. We've been seeing these flipwalkers on several of these top 10s, and they're pretty awesome flavor-wise, as they represent the moment when this individual unlocked the ability to be a Planeswalker. So on one side, they're simply a creature, and then when you meet a certain requirement, they transform into Planeswalkers. We're going to be seeing a lot of Chandra on this list, of course, so starting out with the version of her, which is the earliest version of her within the story, is pretty fitting. Anyway, she starts out as a 3-mana 2/2, which obviously isn't good, but she can transform if you find a way to do 3 damage to your opponent with her in a single turn. She comes with the ability to tap and damage players, as well as the ability to untap when you play a red spell. So setting that up in, say, a burn deck or an aggro deck isn't super far-fetched. You can also actually attack with her, get in for 2, and then play a red spell to untap her, and then tap her to do the last damage, and she'll transform that way. Once she does, she gains the ability to raise her loyalty while doing 2 to a player or planeswalker, and lower her loyalty while doing 2 to a creature. If you flip her and then use her +1, this means Chandra alone has done 5 to your opponent in a single turn, which is pretty sweet. She also has a pretty impressive emblem, since it does 6 to the opponent and then lightning bolts them every upkeep. Unsurprisingly, this Chandra was played in aggressive red decks in Standard, which could easily flip her and take full advantage of the damage she could do to the opponent. She gained all of her points in the Standard of 2015. At number 9, it is Chandra, Acolyte of Flame. Chandra has the interesting distinction of being the only Planeswalker given 3 separate cards in a single set. Core Set 2020 had a heavy Chandra theme, and she received an uncommon, rare, and mythic rare Planeswalker. Of those 3, Chandra, Acolyte of Flame is the only one that's on this list. She doesn't have any abilities that raise her loyalty as part of the cost, but she comes with a 0 ability that raises the loyalty of all red Planeswalkers, which of course includes her. And that means also she's pretty nice in a deck that has multiple Planeswalkers because she can raise all of their loyalty. She has another 0 ability that lets you make 2 1/1s with haste who die at the end step, and perhaps most importantly, she has a -2 that lets you flashback an instant or sorcery card. This is another Chandra Planeswalker who was great in aggro decks. Her second 0 ability could do extra damage, and her -2 could rebuy important burn spells. She also has a single point from a Pioneer mono-red aggro deck. She's got a chance at some points in the future, but she isn't exactly a heavily played card anywhere right now. At number 8, it is Sarkhan the Masterless. He has a higher average finish than Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, so we got the higher spot on the list, even though they have the same score. Like other War of the Spark Planeswalkers, Sarkhan comes with a static ability. He loves dragons, so it makes sense that he punishes opposing creatures for attacking by doing 1 to them for each dragon you control. He also comes with a +1 that makes him and all other Planeswalkers you control into 4/4 flying dragons, which can result in a ton of damage if he has some friends around, and he has a -3 that makes a 4/4 dragon straight up. A lot of the time he comes down and uses that -3, which is a pretty decent deal already, especially because of that static ability, and then he uses his +1 to join his dragon buddy in the sky to quickly end the game. Sarkhan was played in Super Friends decks in Standard, which are generally control decks that run a bunch of Planeswalkers, and obviously, Sarkhan loves having other walkers around, so it was a great win condition there. In addition to that, he was also played in Gruul and Jund aggro decks, and he has a single point in a Pioneer mono-red aggro deck, actually alongside Chandra, Acolyte of Flame. At number 7, it is Tibalt, RAKISH, INSTIGATOR. Like Sarkhan the Masterless, he's a War of the Spark Planeswalker, so he comes with a static ability. His prevents opponents from gaining life, an ability that is highly sought after by aggressive decks. He pairs this with the ability to make incredibly obnoxious Devil tokens, which do 1 damage to any target anytime they die. So you can make them just to chump block and they can still wreak havoc on many board states. So far, Tibalt has gained all of his points in mono-red aggro decks and Standard, but I think he has potential in formats like Historic and Pioneer going forward, since his static ability can be a real boon out of the sideboard for burn decks and mono-red aggro. At number 6, it is LUKKA, COPPERCOAT Outcast. He comes with some pretty impressive abilities, including a +1 that effectively draws you extra cards and an ultimate that can do a ton of damage, but most of his value in constructed formats has come from his -2, which can be used to cheat absurd things into play. Most frequently, Agent of Treachery. Various LUKKA decks existed in both Standard and Historic that sought to make creature tokens with non-creature spells, and then use his -2 to exile one of them to get the agent into play, which would happen every time you used the ability, if your deck was constructed correctly, and obviously that's pretty devastating. In fact, this was such a key component of both Standard and Historic decks that the agent got banned in both formats in June and July of 2020, respectively. This didn't kill LUKKA decks entirely, though, as they shifted into being more creature-based decks that could actually take advantage of his other 2 abilities. It still looked to throw a haymaker with that -2, though, as the deck could use the -2 on any of its creatures to put Coma Cosmos Serpent into play, which is also pretty awesome. He's about to rotate out of Standard, but he's powerful enough that he might find some success in other formats in the future. At number 5, it is Koth of the Hammer. Like a lot of red Planeswalkers, Koth is a fairly aggressive one, as he can represent more damage rather quickly. As a result of making a mountain into a 4/4 creature, he can also help you ramp mana and comes with a relatively easy to get to ultimate ability that turns all your lands into pingers, which is incredible. This array of abilities made him pretty nice in more than just aggro decks. In block, this included both red deck wins and mono-red control. In Standard, he was also played in red deck wins, but also blue-red Delver. His single point in Modern comes from Skred Red, a mono-red mid-range deck with a snow sub-theme. His single point in Extended came in a Scapeshift deck that could side him in against opponents who had too many ways to disrupt the combo. He's played a similar role in the sideboard of Legacy Painter Servant combo decks. He doesn't have any points since 2017, but it wouldn't be a huge shock if he gained more in the future. At number 4, it is Sarkhan the DRAGONSPEAKER. Like we saw earlier in this list with Sarkhan the Masterless, Sarkhan loves him some dragons, and he can even turn into one. This Sarkhan has a +1 that turns him into a 4/4 dragon with flying, indestructible, and haste, so that means he can come down and get in for 4 right away, while also raising his loyalty, and that's not something a lot of Planeswalkers can do. If you're the beatdown, that's often the option you'll choose, but he also comes with a nice -3, which lets you take down most creatures. His emblem is also pretty sweet, especially in faster decks, since you can take advantage of those cards and basically never discard them. Sarkhan was played in a pretty wide variety of decks while in Standard. Aggro decks liked having him at the top of the curve, and control and mid-range decks liked using him as a win condition that could also be removal when you needed that. He's never gained any points outside of Standard. At number 3, after a pretty long break from Chandra's, we return to her with Chandra PYROMASTER. She has a 0 loyalty ability that does the impulsive draw thing, which means she can be a source of card advantage every turn, and she has a +1 that lets you kill small things, damage your opponent, and make creatures unable to block. She also has a pretty sweet ultimate that will win you the game more often than not. However, the ability that gets used the most is definitely the 0 loyalty one. As a source of card advantage, she's been pretty widely played on both of her trips through Standard, including in the decks you'd expect, like various red aggressive builds, but she was even played in decks like Devotion to Green, where she doesn't help your devotion at all, and that does a good job of explaining how good she could be. She's also been played in modern Jund decks, and she has a single point from a mono-red Prison deck in Legacy. She doesn't have any points since 2018, though. It is notable she's legal in Historic on Arena as a result of a printing in Amonkhet Remastered, but so far that hasn't resulted in any points. At number 2, we have Chandra FLAMECALLER. Most of the Planeswalkers on this list have been pretty nice for aggro decks, but that's not really true for Chandra FLAMECALLER. At 6 mana, she's a pretty darn expensive Planeswalker for red, and her suite of abilities are definitely more well-suited to a control deck. Her -X lets her do X damage to everything, which means she can come down and immediately cause some significant destruction. In addition to that ability, she can also go after the opponent with elemental tokens, or draw you some cards. So far, the Chandra has not seen play since rotating out of Standard, where she was played in various control and energy decks, and she may be a bit too expensive mana-wise to find a home anywhere else. Still, Her 56 points have her pretty high up on this list, so she's likely to be on it for a pretty long time. And at number 1, unsurprisingly, it's Chandra, Torch of Defiance. She made it to number 2 on my 2021 update for the top 10 Planeswalkers, so it's not too surprising that she's here, and she really blows all the other Planeswalkers on this list out of the water. This Chandra has 4 loyalty abilities instead of the usual 3, and they're all pretty great. Her first +1 gives you card advantage and also supplies a potential source of damage. Her second +1 ramps you a bit, and her -3 can remove most creatures, and her ultimate is pretty much game-breaking. A huge chunk of her points came in Standard, where she was a staple. 154 of her 193 points came in Standard, to be exact, but she has also found success in multiple other formats since rotating out. She's gained points in Pioneer, Historic, Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. She's good in a wide variety of decks too, and isn't the kind of card that only functions in one specific archetype or anything like that. Aggressive, mid-range, and control decks have all been known to play her. All of this is a pretty good indicator that she won't stop putting up points anytime soon. It would take a pretty impressive red Planeswalker to ever topple Chandra, Torch of Defiance, from her commanding position at the top of this list. Well, those are the 10 red Planeswalkers that have had the biggest effect on competitive Magic. If you want to own any of these Planeswalkers, check out the description where you'll find a direct Card Kingdom link for every card in this video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it for the algorithm. Also, if you want to stay aware of future videos, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. And if you want to catch up on other MTG top 10s, including a bunch more on Planeswalkers, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.